Right now on Morning News Now, Hurricane Helene picking up steam. In Florida, they're making last-minute preparations, with the monster storm now expected to slam into Florida's Gulf Coast as a catastrophic Category 3 storm. Mexico already dealing with flooding, and the National Weather Service now predicts some areas will see storm surges high as 20 feet. Tropical alerts stretching as far away as North Carolina. We're tracking the storm on the ground and in the studio as a large swath of the South braces for impact. Also breaking this morning, New York Mayor Eric Adams expected to be indicted on federal charges, according to multiple sources. He's denying any wrongdoing and saying he is staying put, despite growing calls for his resignation.
I will fight these injustices with every ounce of my strength and my spirit. Make no mistake, you elected me to lead this city, and lead it I will.
What we know about the investigation. Plus, push for peace as Israel prepares for a possible ground invasion in Lebanon. The U.S. and its allies propose a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, the proposal that leaders hope will bring both sides back from the brink. And crisis averted. With just days to go until a government shutdown, Congress passes a major funding measure to keep the lights on. We're digging into what's in the legislation and the controversial proposal that did not make the cut. Good morning. Good to have you with us on a busy Thursday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah Sellers is on assignment. We start with Hurricane Helene. It is picking up power, supercharging in the Gulf of Mexico after slamming Cancun with 80-mile-an-hour winds and torrential flooding. Now this major storm is heading north to Florida's Big Bend, and the Gulf Coast is already starting to feel the first effects of the hurricane. This thing is so big, with winds extending hundreds of miles from the hurricane center. Forecasters are actually issuing tropical storm warnings for places that usually just don't get them. Folks along the Panhandle and into Alabama are filling sandbags, bracing for a storm surge that could reach up to 20 feet in some areas. The potential for deadly flooding also has officers going through neighborhoods announcing mandatory evacuations ahead of Helene's arrival later tonight. And those who choose to stay behind, they are clearing out store shelves and stocking up on essentials like water and food that will last a long time after the storm hits. Even though FEMA has already set up staging points in the area, it could be several days before they're able to get to some of the worst affected areas and provide aid. We're covering the hurricane from all angles this morning. Meteorologist Angie Lassman has been tracking Helene and has the latest on what to expect. We also have Ben McMillan joining us this morning. He's a professional storm chaser who's on one of the barrier islands on Florida's Panhandle. But first, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Marissa Parra, who is in Tampa. Marissa, good morning. The very outer bands of the storm are starting to make landfall this morning. We know it's several hours before landfall, but describe what it's like there right now.
Hey, Joe. So I will say we're in Florida, so we're used to rain. So it does feel like another Florida rainstorm. But that's what can be so deceiving about these types of weather events, especially for what we're expecting in a place like Tampa. We're not expecting to bear the brunt of the winds. We know that that's going to be in the Big Bend area of Florida, but it's just going to be this nonstop rain. It is not going to let up. So what we're seeing here is a lot of precipitation coming down, and what you probably can't see behind me, just over there, that is the bay, and that is the big concern, because it's not just the flooding, it's the storm surge that's posing a big problem and a big concern for a lot of low-lying areas, including this one. Because it's so dark, Joe, you probably can't tell, but we're along the Riverwalk. This is normally pretty bustling, maybe not at this time in the morning, but this is a place that normally has a lot of people late at night, and this has been evacuated, like a lot of low-lying areas and places that are close to either the bay or the Gulf of Mexico. And so on the other side of the camera, also what you can't see because it's pretty dark, so we can't really show you. On the other side of the camera, you have a whole bunch of empty storefronts, and you have what's called flood protection panels that are installed, essentially creating a fortress around the stores that they're trying to protect here, Joe. So we are just seeing a lot of rain. We don't expect that to stop. And I would say that the activity around here has also indeed come to a stop. It is pretty much a ghost town. So I think people have made their decision whether or not to flee or to hunker down for Helene, because the outer bands are definitely here, Joe.
So, I mean, Marissa, for a place like Tampa, the winds may not be the major issue, as you note. The storm surge and flooding are big concerns. What are you hearing from folks there?
And Joe, I apologize. If you are talking to me, I cannot hear you, so you might have to come back to us because unfortunately I can't hear you. But if you have asked me a question, definitely come back to me so that we can hear you.
All right, let's play a soundbite here where we can hear about some of the people who are concerned about the flooding as they're preparing for this storm to make landfall.
Some people say the whole state of Florida can be like a flood zone now if we get enough rain.
I'm very worried. Water, you can't run away from it. It comes on you before you even know it.
All right, Marissa, we will let you go. Dealing with a lot of technical challenges covering a hurricane. Please continue to stay safe out there. Let's bring in Ben McMillan. He is a storm chaser and also a certified EMT. You can see he's out there right now. Alligator Point, Florida, which is one of the barrier islands off the Panhandle. Ben, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Just tell us, what's it like there right now? What are you seeing and feeling?
Yeah, good morning, Joe. We're tracking this. What is expected to be major Hurricane Helene from Alligator Point here in Franklin County, Florida. You can see this is all that separates the ocean from the long what you can see waves already coming up, battering the rocks here. That's expected to get much worse throughout the day. We're expecting storm surge up to as much as 20 feet. Some officials calling it unsurvivable. This is something that folks here are not something that they've seen for a while because this storm is such a high intensity. We have seen several storms in the last year and a half, but this could be the biggest.
Unsurvivable, that's a word you don't like to hear. You have covered many hurricanes before. Talk to us about how this one compares with what we've seen in recent years. Put it into context, and does it feel like people are taking it seriously?
You know, I think there's a lot of folks who are still here on this outer island area, and they haven't evacuated, and I think they think, oh, it's just another storm. But we saw Hurricane Idalia last year and Hurricane Debbie earlier this year. And just because you see a lot of storms, that doesn't mean that this one won't be a whole nother level. We're expecting to be at major status, which is winds over 111 miles an hour, and waves are forecasted to be as high as 40 feet. So this is not Idalia, this is not Debbie, this is a whole other beast, if you will, as this storm comes ashore.
You are a former police officer. You're a trained EMT with 20 years of experience who's chasing storms. I know you've seen a lot. You know the dangers. You also know the precautions to take as these next 24 hours unfold. What are some of your biggest concerns for those who maybe don't take the storms as seriously as you do?
Well, you know, a lot of people tend to sometimes not stay connected, maybe not watch the media, but today is something that you really need to be aware of. You need to be watching folks like you in studio as you talk about exactly where this storm is going and know where you need to take action. Here in Franklin County, it's not just the low-lying areas. It's the entire county under that mandatory evacuation. You can see the rain battering me already coming down in large amounts here. We've had radar estimates over a foot of rainfall already, and the storms still have several hundred miles offshore. So you can tell this is going to be a very dangerous situation out here today in Florida.
Ben, what are you keeping an eye on today? I mean, on a day like this, are you ready to move to wherever you need to move to, or are you going to plan to stay put where you are right now on the island?
Well, we're monitoring the conditions, monitoring the winds around the storm. As the winds start to push the water more towards the shore, that's when we will leave. Still, when the storm is several miles offshore, we're trained professionals. We kind of know how to adapt our skill set to what's needed, but we don't recommend people do this. I've been doing this, as you mentioned, for 20 years. We want people to get inland now and stay safe so you don't have to deal with any of these issues.
So important advice there. Ben McMillan, continue to stay safe. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We really do appreciate it. Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us now with our Morning News Now weather, everything you need to know about Helene's track. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. You heard a little bit about what's going on with Helene right now, but let's kind of break down those minor details. We've got the winds coming up to 90 miles per hour with that last update. That's still a Category 1. It's moving northeast at 12 miles per hour. And you might be wondering, how is this going to become a major hurricane in such a short amount of time? We've got plenty of fuel across parts of the Gulf of Mexico. This is going to enter a very warm part of the Gulf of Mexico. It is also going to spend a little bit of time over an environment that has low shear. That helps to intensify it. And we've got just plenty of moisture for this thing to tap into. We did not see a rapid intensification overnight, but we still likely will see that here as we get through the day today. So no surprise with just how large this system is and how fast it's moving and how strong it's expected to get that we have tropical alerts expanding all the way across the state of Georgia into the Carolinas, and of course almost the entirety of the state of Florida included in this. Notice how far the hurricane warnings stretch from the coastal areas of Florida all the way into central Georgia. That tells you how widespread these impacts are going to be, and we've got multiple impacts that we're going to watch. So let's time it out. We'll expect likely for the system to become a major hurricane within the next 12 hours. And then even up to 6 hours before it makes landfall, it'll still be intensifying. We're expecting right now Category 3 as it makes landfall in the Big Bend area, anywhere from about 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock tonight. That is, of course, where the center of the storm will be. But again, the impacts are going to be far reaching. We will see the quite expansive kind of wind field of this system. It's over 400 miles wide. So that means that the tropical storm force winds are going to extend over much of Florida. We've already seen indications of some of those tropical storm force gusts across southern portions of Florida, and they're going to extend into Georgia as well. This is going to be something that we'll watch into the later parts of the day Friday, as well as it works its way to the north and then eventually to the west. This is when we're going to be watching for a really incredible kind of rain event unfolding. We'll get to the inland flooding, but let's focus on those winds first, because that's kind of the first up for folks at the center of the storm, 90 to 120 miles per hour. But even far away from it, we're talking hundreds of miles away, we're dealing with 50 to 70 mile per hour winds in Tampa Bay. That means that we'll likely see places like Tallahassee have historic wind damage, something they've never seen before with a Category 1 or with a hurricane working across that region. Even Atlanta, it'll still be a Category 1 hurricane. Major disruptions, of course, to the airports, but damage, wind damage up and down the I-75 corridor into Tennessee is going to be likely. So the power outages are going to be expansive, and they likely will last for an extended period of time, potentially weeks across this region, including the Atlanta metro area stretching down to the Gulf Coast. Notice the storm surges, too. The National Hurricane Center called this catastrophic unsurvivable storm surge 10 to 20 feet. If you remember Michael, if you remember Ian, those were in that same kind of range, and it essentially decimates buildings. So that's what we're talking about from Apalachicola down through Cedar Key. And even as far south as Tampa, we could look at some record-breaking storm surges in some spots. This is going to be something that we'll watch with time here as we get closer to those high tide times. We're already seeing kind of water piling up. Part of it is thanks to the fact that we have a really shallow shelf just offshore, and it's quite large. That means that it's not hard with really strong winds to kind of pile all of that water up at a wall along the coast, and that'll be going for miles inland, not just right directly at the coast. And of course, on top of that, that flooding that I talked about, the inland flooding, notice the high-risk areas, Tallahassee, Atlanta, Asheville, all of that included, Joe. This is going to be river and flash flooding that we'll see, but this is going to go into those higher elevations as well. We've got the potential for up to 18 inches of rain in some of these spots. The flash flooding will be something very notable, and you can see all those flood watches that are already up for more than 40 million people at this time.
All right, Angie, we'll keep checking in with you throughout the morning. Thank you so much. Now to another major story this morning. NBC News is learning that New York City Mayor Eric Adams is expected to face federal criminal charges. That's according to two sources familiar with the matter. The exact charges remain sealed and are expected to be revealed later today. Comes amid a series of separate probes involving other members of the mayor's administration and campaign, which have led to a series of high-profile resignations. Adams, a Democrat, becomes the city's first sitting mayor to face federal charges. He denies any wrongdoing. NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter joins us now. So we know right now this indictment remains sealed, but walk us through what we do know and remind us of just some of the law enforcement activity we've seen sort of swirling around the mayor and his aides recently.
Well, it's that law enforcement activity, Joe, that we've been watching that has kind of keyed us in on some of the potential avenues of this investigation. Some of it taking place just after Labor Day when there were phones that were taken from the deputy mayor of public safety. This is the person that oversees the NYPD and the fire department. His phone taken. The person who's in charge of schools, his brother, David Banks, phone taken. His wife, the first deputy to the mayor, Sheena Wright, her phone taken. So there's been a lot of ongoing investigations involving specifically City Hall. We also have a separate NYPD investigation, a number of phones taken there. Our lives are on the phones these days, so that's what federal prosecutors and the FBI have been looking for, is What have these people been saying to each other? What have they been talking about? Who are they communicating with? And now the question is, what are the specific federal crimes? We don't know that yet. Believed to be around a campaign finance issues or violations that may have occurred. Whether or not there's foreign money that's involved, that's going to be a big question and something we're going to be watching for today.
The mayor already speaking out about this. Sounds pretty defiant. What's he saying? Well,
the mayor's speaking out and saying, look, I told you that I was going to do things for this city. I was going to work hard for you. And as a result, I would have a target on my back. And now you can see that, in fact, I do have a target on my back, and I'm expecting federal charges. I think the question here going forward, we've already seen it, a number of resignations from legal counsel to the head of schools, as I just mentioned. Are we going to see more defections? And we saw it with the police department, the police commissioner leaving after there was an investigation that was announced and launched there. So going forward, who else leaves city government at a time where there's a lot of serious issues facing the city?
Let's take a listen to the mayor's statement here.
I will fight these injustices with every ounce of my strength and my spirit. If I'm charged, I know I am innocent. I will request an immediate trials so the New Yorkers can hear the truth.
So how are Democrats already responding to this? Is there going to be pressure on him to resign?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was even before these charges were announced because of those departures. So you have members of Congress that have called for his resignation. You have other members now in New York City government that are perhaps not as well known to our audience across the country. But I think when you look at it, those calls are only going to grow from here. And New York's governor says, look, I'm aware of this conduct. And she just put a statement out in the last hour saying, I'm aware of the conduct, I'm aware of the allegations, but excuse me, because this is a law enforcement action, I'm not going to weigh in just yet. I think once these charges are announced, and depending upon the severity of them, later today we'll see a lot of folks speaking out.
All right, Tom Winter, we know you'll stay on it. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Turning now to news from the Middle East, the U.S., France, and other allies have jointly called for an immediate 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. They hope a pause will allow for negotiations amid fears that this conflict will lead to an all-out war in the Middle East. Here's what President Biden had to say.
An all-out war is possible. There needs to be a two-state solution. Ultimately, it needs to happen.
The IDF is preparing for a possible ground invasion into Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands of people there have been displaced by Israeli strikes, and health officials there say more than 600 people have been killed. Neither side is showing any signs of backing down, as Hezbollah leaders are promising to inflict heavy casualties in any ground war. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now from Haifa, Israel, with more on this. Raf, good morning. So tell us more about this proposed ceasefire and how Israel is responding.
Joe, good morning. The proposal on the table here is for a 3-week ceasefire to give time to get to a more permanent solution to end the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, which has been going on for the last 11 months. This proposal, spearheaded by the United States and France, it has the support of a number of Arab nations, a number of European nations, and it's the product of some pretty intense shuttle diplomacy by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and others at the UN General Assembly this week, when a lot of world leaders were all physically in the same place. The question, of course, is will it be accepted by both Israel and Hezbollah? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is, as we speak, on a flight to New York, to the United Nations, and he is indicating right now that he does not appear interested in a ceasefire. I want to read you just a little bit of a statement that his office issued a little while ago. He said, "The news about a ceasefire is incorrect. This is an American-French proposal to which the Prime Minister did not even respond. The Prime Minister instructed the IDF to continue the fighting with full force." And as you said, the Israeli military is now, for the first time, explicitly talking about launching a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. We have not heard from Hezbollah in terms of their openness to a potential ceasefire. But, Joe, there are very few countries that really have any leverage with the militant group. The government of Lebanon has basically no control over what they do. And it is only really Iran that has significant sway with them. So at this point, there might be a lot of talk about diplomacy in New York, but neither of the combatants seem to be moving towards that ceasefire. Jeff?
I mean, President Biden has admitted the prospect of all-out war is a possibility, and Netanyahu's reaction that you just mentioned to the ceasefire proposal shows attempts by the U.S. and allies at de-escalation just aren't working so far. Is there any sense that some kind of agreement can be reached to head off at least this ground invasion?
It's not looking good at the moment, Joe. The goal of the Israeli operation, according to the Israeli government, is not just to stop the firing from Hezbollah over the Israeli border, but it is to push Hezbollah's forces all the way back from the border. And it is not clear that that is a goal that can be achieved without a ground invasion. Frankly, it's not clear it's a goal that can be achieved with a ground invasion, given how dug in Hezbollah is in southern Lebanon. But I got to tell you, Joe, there is deep, deep skepticism in Israel about any international agreement to try to get Hezbollah to move away. You'll remember there was a major war between the two sides back in 2006. It ended with a Security Council resolution called 1701. And as part of that, Hezbollah was supposed to withdraw away from the border north of a river in Lebanon. And the reality is, over the last 20 years, Hezbollah has continued to rebuild in southern Lebanon under the eyes of the international community and the eyes of the United Nations. And many in Israel simply have no confidence that any international deal would actually change Hezbollah behavior.
Raf, you pointed out Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming here to New York to address the UN General Assembly. You note he's not interested in his ceasefire. Do we know what he is going to say, what his message is expected to be?
Yeah, I think it'll be similar to what we've been hearing from him over the last week or so. He will say that Hezbollah attacked Israel unprovoked on October 8th in support of Hamas, that it has been firing into Israel for 11 months, that Israel, like any other country, has the right to defend itself, and that Israel is taking these actions in order to allow its 60,000 or so displaced Israeli civilians to return to their homes. I can tell you, Joe, we were speaking to some of those civilians last night. Many of them tell us they do not have faith in Prime Minister Netanyahu that this operation is going to fundamentally change the dynamics on the ground. And it is likely that we will see protests outside the United Nations and a lot of criticism inside the UN at Israel's behavior, both in Gaza and in Lebanon.
Joe. Raf, thank you so much. We have a lot more to get to this morning, including Vice President Kamala Harris's first solo network interview, what she told our Stephanie Ruhle about her plans for the economy with less than 6 weeks until Election Day. But first, shutdown averted. We're digging through the newly passed government funding bill to break down what did and did not make the cut. That's next. Welcome back. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill overwhelmingly passed a funding bill last night, which is expected to avoid a government shutdown just days before the deadline. Comes after a month of negotiations between Republicans and Democrats in both chambers. 78 senators voted to approve the package shortly after it passed in the House by a vote of 341 to 82. All the opposition to the package came solely from Republicans in each of those votes. The bill will now head to the desk of President Biden, who's expected to quickly sign it into law. It would fund the government at current levels through December 20th. And no one is happier to hear that date than NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale, who has no holiday plans this year and just wants to be at the Capitol. Ali, good morning. I mean, this funding deal, it ends a month-long fight in the House. It included a failed vote. It included pressure from former President Trump to try and include a measure on voting laws. Walk us through how negotiations went leading up to the vote and just what made it into this final package.
Joe, how did you know that this is where I prefer to spend my holidays? And also, how did you know that my mom wouldn't be watching so she wouldn't be mad that we're talking about that? On the one hand, the December 20th date is good news for appropriators who want to be able to spend the lame duck period after the election actually putting together the 12 government funding packages that they would need in order to not just keep kicking this can down the road. On the other hand, it was a bear to get here, especially for Speaker Johnson, because he initially had a March 2025 funding date that he was targeting, but even more so because former President Trump, as well as conservative Republicans, were vehement that they needed to see the SAVE Act, which was a conservative election integrity bill that would have stopped non-citizens from voting. Of course, that's already illegal, but that was one of the key pieces that Johnson needed, at least to show his conference and the former president that he was willing to keep as Plan A. That, of course, failed on the floor. That's embarrassing to leadership, but it was something that Johnson needed to do in order to get to this final place, which, candidly, is where everyone on Capitol Hill thought this was going to end up. But, of course, combined with the fact that they were leaving town to go home and campaign for their reelection bids, it allowed the process to get that much more sped up. Democrats and Republicans came together in bipartisan fashion, a good chunk of Republicans providing votes still, too, to pass this, send it to the Senate, and send it to President Biden's desk well ahead of the deadline. Big deal for Congress, which we know only operates on tight deadlines. So that's good news.
All right, so we know how Allie's mom feels. Let's talk about how lawmakers feel. You got Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He called the GOP's failed demands, quote, partisan bully tactics. House Speaker Mike Johnson blamed his Senate counterpart for delay in passing the bill. Despite all that, it was overwhelmingly bipartisan. So what are we hearing from lawmakers?
Look, Republicans are not necessarily happy about this. They voiced that pretty immediately after the first Plan A failed last week. But there's also a dose of reality here, and there's a huge dose of needing to be back in the district, especially for House members who are all up for re-election, and many of them on the Republican side are in tough battles to keep their seats as Republicans try to hold on to the gavel and Democrats try their darndest to try to take it back. This is a House, and you know this so well because we've had this conversation about what it looks like in practice. Razor-thin majorities mean that Johnson is always trying to haggle with various handfuls of his conference. This government funding deal was no exception. And again, the role of Trump in all of this was outsized because he had and was voicing the fact that he said he was willing to shut down the government if he didn't get the version of this that he wanted. In Johnson's words, that would have been political malpractice so close to election. Obviously, that's true. Yes, it was a gamble. Schumer's partly right on that one, but all of this is always politics, and it shook out in the right place.
All right, Allie, thank you so much. Now, all this comes with only 40 days to go until Election Day. It's unclear who will control Congress next year. Also unclear who's going to be in the White House. The race for president is still virtually tied within the margin of error in most national polls. Well, now both Vice President Harris and former President Trump are highlighting their plans for the economy, trying to convince voters why they are the best option to help lower costs and taxes. NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell takes a closer look.
Both campaigns focused on an issue that affects every voter, the economy.
The cost of living in America is still just too high. You know it, and I know it.
Vice President Harris, who's faced criticism for limited policy specifics, laid out what she called a pragmatic approach to lower costs, invest in small businesses, and bring more manufacturing to the U.S., a message aimed at Pittsburgh.
By offering tax credits for expanding good union jobs in steel and iron and manufacturing communities.
As if debating from a distance, former President Trump countered Harris's new plans from North Carolina.
Our economy is doing really, really badly. Kamala goes to work every day in the White House. Families are suffering now. So if she has a plan, she should stop grandstanding and do it. Just do it.
While the vice president has made up ground in polling on voters' views of who would best handle the economy, a new poll shows Mr. Trump still has the edge among likely voters at 50%, with Harris at 39%. The former president tying Harris to inflation.
But ask yourself, is anything less expensive than it was 4 years ago?
Harris speaking to MSNBC.
Donald Trump has a history of taking care of very rich people. And I'm not mad at anybody for being rich, but they should pay their fair share.
From the economy to another hotly contested issue, immigration. Vice President Harris is headed to Arizona Friday, where she's expected to make a stop along the southern border. Back to you.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. Let's talk more about this. As part of his economic proposals, Mr. Trump has embraced a wider use of tariffs. That's a tax on imports that experts say ultimately gets passed on to American consumers. The goal is to force companies to keep manufacturing jobs here or face punishing tariffs, money that America can use to pay for all sorts of proposed programs. In that exclusive interview that Kelly just mentioned, Vice President Kamala Harris sat down with MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle, who pressed her on the use of tariffs and Mr. Trump's record on the economy.
Tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, I'm going to, and I say this in all sincerity, he's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues. And one must be serious and have a plan, and a real plan that's not just about some talking point ending in an exclamation at a political rally, but actually putting the thought into what will be the return on the investment, what will be the economic impact on everyday people. Here's what I know in terms of the facts. Donald Trump left us with the worst economy since the Great Depression when you look at, for example, the employment numbers.
It was during COVID, and employment was so high because we shut down the government, we shut down the country.
Even before the pandemic, he lost manufacturing jobs by most people's estimates, at least 200,000. He lost manufacturing plants. Ask the auto workers how he lost auto plants. We have grown over 20 new auto plants. He has an agenda that would include making it more difficult for workers to earn overtime, an agenda that would include cutting off access to small business loans for small businesses, an agenda that includes tariffs to the point that the average working person will spend 20% more on everyday necessities and an estimated $4,000 more a year on those everyday necessities, to the point that top economists in our country, from Nobel laureates to people at Moody's and Goldman Sachs, have compared my plan with his and said my plan would grow the economy, his would shrink the economy.
Our thanks to Stephanie Ruhle for bringing us that exclusive interview. We are staying on top of a major story this morning. Hurricane Helene gathering strength as it barrels toward the Florida coast. We are on the ground in Tallahassee with the latest. That is next. We're back now with the latest on Hurricane Helene. The powerful storm just cut across Cuba and is now making its way to the Florida Panhandle. That's where people near Tallahassee are now stocking up on sandbags, hoping to keep their homes and their businesses safe. And that is where we find NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas, who joins us now with the latest. Tom, good morning. I know you're just south of Tallahassee, which is pretty much the center of where Helene is expected to make landfall later today. Set the scene for us. What's it like there?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, if the track sticks, Hurricane Helene should come right through here, Appalachia Bay. And if that's the case, it's going to be the most powerful hurricane to hit this area since the 1840s. Obviously, it's going to be a Category 3, even possibly a Category 4. The winds will be a big issue, but it's that storm surge. 15 to 20 feet. To give you an idea, I don't know if you can see the palm tree tops or the treetops here. It's going to be somewhere near that. And the National Hurricane Center has described that only one way, that it is unsurvivable. This is a mandatory evacuation zone right here. We're just here this morning. Over the next 12 hours, it's going to get more intense. We're going to move inland to Tallahassee, which is about 30 miles away. But there are concerns there as well. Tallahassee has never seen a hurricane this big, at least getting a direct hit that way. There are these live oak trees that are all around the state capitol, and they're worried that those trees come down, it could lead to problems trying to rescue people and the recovery as well. You also have major universities like Florida State University, Florida A&M, and this hurricane formed so fast, as you know, that many students couldn't get out, so now there are shelters at those universities. But again, now everyone's watching and waiting. They had about a day, 2 days notice to get ready for this massive hurricane. And again, people are describing this hurricane as sort of a life-changing event. It's a hurricane that a direct hit on a city or a town can change life there forever. Joe?
And Tom, just pointing out just how high 20 feet is, just how unsurvivable that could be, just is so striking. Just people who live there, we've seen a lot of video of folks stocking up on supplies, getting those sandbags. Do you get the sense that people are evacuating, or as we like to say in the news business, that people are hunkering down right now and going to wait it out?
Right, yeah. You know, you have a mix, right? You always have your folks that want to be cavalier and maybe test out the storm. People here remember Michael from 2018. It wasn't a direct hit, but they felt the effects, and they lost everything in Michael. We're actually coming to you live from a restaurant that's on the other side of this live shot. It's called the Salty Donkey. It's a beautiful restaurant just on the bay. It was completely destroyed. They just finished rebuilding, and now they have Hurricane Helene to deal with as well. But they know the power of those storms, so they've gotten out of the way. Governor DeSantis, the National Hurricane Center, meteorologists all across, up and down the Sunshine State have made it very clear that you do not want to mess with this hurricane. This is not a hurricane you take lightly. Florida did get hit recently. We were just there. It got a glancing blow from a Category 1 storm that also hit New Orleans as well. Those storms weren't that bad. There's no weak hurricanes, but when you talk about a Category 3, a Category 4, the intensity, the storm surge level, where it's going to hit, the only somewhat good news is that it may hit here Appalachia Bay, which, if that's the case, it's not a very big population zone. People live here, but it's a park, right? It's a national park that people can come out here. They fish, they hunt, they have a great time. If it was going to hit a little closer to Tampa, as we know the storm surge there, it could have been really, really bad. And again, there's still 12 hours, so you never know what's going to happen. And in Tampa, I know they're taking this seriously as well and evacuating zones in Tampa as well. Joe?
All right, Tom, thanks so much for your reporting. Please stay safe today. Coming up, for millions of Americans, their alma mater is a point of pride. But which schools rank among the best in the country? We're going to talk with the managing editor of education at U.S. News and World Report to discuss their new rankings. Next. Welcome back. Climate Week NYC is in full swing here in New York. It is the largest annual climate event in the U.S., bringing together global leaders across several industries, all with one goal in mind: fighting climate change. That's a huge worry for young people. A survey by the Lancet Planetary Health found that 59% of 16 to 25-year-olds say they're extremely worried about our climate. Experts call this eco-anxiety. They say it's one of the biggest challenges we face today. Climate expert and author Heather White is here to help us maybe make our lives a little bit greener and talk about this. You actually just wrote a book. You have it right there. It is called Eco-Anxiety, just out this week. Talk about why you wanted to write this and what you address in the book.
Well, I was planning on writing this book, Eco-Anxiety, to be released this week, but what I wasn't planning is to have a Category 4 storm barreling towards the southeast. It was really a conversation with my teenagers, even after 20 years of my experience in environmental law and policy, that drew me to start talking about the mental health impacts of climate. Young people, as you said, with that study from the Lancet, are really worried about the future they're inheriting from us. And this book is an invitation for all of us to get involved.
In the book, you focus on helping people discover their service superpower and contribute to the overall climate movement through self-discovery and self-care. Talk more about what you mean there.
You know, Joe, this issue is so overwhelming. I think a lot of people want to get involved, but they're afraid of doing it wrong. They're afraid of being judged. And they're also asking themselves, I skipped the straw, but is that enough? You know, when we have this overwhelming issue, I have an assessment. It's 5 minutes, and it asks, who are you in service? How do you show up for the people you love? And then based on your gifts and service, I then match you to a daily practice of sustainability. And here's what's important, is your daily practice of sustainability can ease your eco-anxiety, bring more joy into your life, and create that culture shift we need for these big policy solutions we've been talking about in Climate Week, for them to work.
You mentioned how overwhelming it feels because you just can't control the climate. So what are some of the small things you recommend people do to feel like they're playing their part?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think understanding you can't do it all and knowing that your individual actions, whether it's calling your member of Congress, whether it's switching to an EV car, whether it's skipping single-use plastic when you can, these little behaviors do add up in that culture shift that we need for these big policy solutions. And most importantly, listening to the young people in your life about this issue, letting them know that they're not alone in climate action. We had the UN Summit of the Future, where young people were saying, we need change and we need it now, letting them know that you're with them and you're going to do all you can to create a healthier, greener, more just future.
You mentioned we are bracing for a hurricane now. We see more hurricanes these days. We see more wildfires these days. That contributes to the anxiety. What do you say to folks to help them deal with some of those feelings that come up during times like this?
Joe, that's such a good question. I think people are feeling three main things. The first is this overwhelm that you just talked about. The second is maybe a denial. Maybe if you're living in Atlanta, for example, there's no way this hurricane could hit me, even though meteorologists are saying be careful. And then I think the third is this sense of helplessness. So the first thing you can do with respect to overwhelm is really rely on trusted news sources with respect to the status of the hurricane and what's to be expected. The second is when it comes to denial, understanding that, like Hugo, we're dealing with a situation where you really do need to understand it could happen to you. This idea of helplessness, the first thing you can do is take action. The Red Cross has been telling all of us for years to have a go kit. Be ready no matter if you live in Montana like I do. Get that go kit ready to evacuate. If you need to evacuate, take it very seriously. But the important part of this book is that this is all about joy. And you can actually have a lot of fun spending time in nature and really making a difference for your community.
I love ending on that point. Heather White, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the opportunity, Joe.
All right. Each year, U.S. News and World Report ranks universities across the country based on their academic quality. It's a list that's designed to help future students and their families determine which school might be a good fit. The 2025 rankings were released on Tuesday. This year, the top 5 universities overall are Princeton, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. Maybe not a shocker there. Here to break down this year's rankings is managing editor of education at U.S. News, Lamont Jones. Good to have you with us, Lamont. I mean, you've been doing this for 40 years. Walk us through everything your team looks at to determine which school lands where.
Well, thanks for having me. We have a very extensive and detailed methodology that looks at upwards of 17 different factors in terms of academic excellence and quality. A little bit more than half of what compile the rankings, scores, so to speak, or the rankings are based on outcomes. A school enrolling a wide range of students from all backgrounds and their postgraduate success, such as earnings that they have and indebtedness, a manageable debt once they do graduate, because we know that's a big issue.
So the top 15 overall schools are all private institutions, which do tend to have a much higher institution. You talk about the concerns about cost. Does that say something about public education, or is that a criticism that maybe there are more public schools that should be taken, a closer look at because they offer such a value and can offer such a great education? How much is affordability a factor in the rankings?
Well, I would add that UCLA, which is tied for 15th, is a public school. It's the highest ranking public school on the list. But while there are, the private colleges higher up, affordability is something that we do look at. Now, affordability can vary. For example, there are many private schools that offer so much non-loan aid that in some cases they could be more affordable than a comparable public school. So we do encourage, and we amass and collate all of that data so that students can go on the usnews.com site and look at each individual school's profile and see how that school fits in terms of their personal finances, their family's finances, their academic goals, and what they want to do once they graduate with a degree. So affordability is something that is rather relative, but it is a major factor, we know. And just quickly, that's why we actually, too, just launched Scholarship Finder, money you don't have to pay back. We have more than 20,000 scholarships in our Scholarship Finder database on usnews.com. It's a free database. So that's important to families, they tell us. And we do prioritize what students and their families tell us are factors that are important to them when we are ranking the colleges.
And we should point out, you guys have rankings that include top historically Black colleges and universities, top performers on social mobility, and the best national liberal arts colleges. I do want to point out, as you know, these rankings have faced some criticism in recent years. Some argue they're biased toward selected private schools. They don't capture all of the schools' offerings. We saw Columbia drop out from the list. What do you have to say to prospective students who might question the results? What are some of the changes you've made to address some of these concerns?
Well, we do understand that nobody's ever going to be happy with any ranking of any kind. But what we do know, and we reassure our readers, our audience, prospective college students and their families, is that we have amassed a lot of information here for you. We are a great starting point in making one of the most important decisions of your life. One of the most expensive, up there with even buying a house, perhaps, in some cases. And so we are a starting point. Use what we have and what we provided, the information that you're looking for, to make the best decision for yourself about higher education.
All right. Lamont Jones, thank you so much for your time this morning. It is good to have you with us. We appreciate it. Coming up, he is one of the most celebrated actors alive. Now he's joining us right here on Morning News Now. After the break, what the one and only Ian McKellen told me about whether he would reprise his iconic role of Gandalf. That much more. Stay with us. Finally this hour, one of the greatest actors of our time is putting the shoe on the other foot, so to speak. Ian McKellen has spent decades on screen and on stage, achieving worldwide fame with his roles in everything from Shakespearean classics to epic fantasies. Now he's turning the tables with his new film where he gets to play a theater critic. This week we chatted about that movie and whether he also might return to one of his most iconic roles. Ian McKellen, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very nice to be with you.
Let's start by talking about your new film. What was it like to play the role of the critic? I mean, it seems like you really embraced the part.
Well, they said the devil has the best tunes, and Jimmy Erskine is a very powerful critic of theatre set in the 1930s when critics had enormous power in a way that they don't today, because everyone's a critic, isn't it? Aren't they, on the internet and so on? But he has some wonderful lines to say, but unfortunately it goes off the rails a bit, and the story develops into something much nastier than it starts out as, I think. Well, great fun to play. Wonderful.
It sounds like a role that you really relished. I mean, of course, you're known for roles like Gandalf the Grey and Lord of the Rings. You're known for X-Men. You're also, though, a highly acclaimed stage actor. Did you feel like you had flipped the tables, that you suddenly were on the other side after receiving the words of critics for so long? Was there any, perhaps?
A little bit. You know, actors are very used to criticism before the show actually opens or the film is made, because the director is there giving notes, giving advice, giving warnings, giving orders, criticism of all sorts. So something written in the newspaper isn't too frightening after the period of rehearsal. But critics have been very kind to me over the years, probably too kind. So this wasn't an attempt to take revenge or anything like that.
Was there anyone you sort of modeled your performance after, any particular critic, or perhaps a combination of some?
I'm not going to tell you.
We'll have to figure it out.
I know who I'm playing, but I'm not going to tell you.
You mentioned, I mean, this is a dark and complex role, which makes it fun. You've played villains in the past, but there was something, I guess, calculating about the character that gave it a lot of depth. Can you talk more about that?
Well, I had a personal connection with Jimmy Erskine because, like me, he's gay. But he's gay in the 1930s, when in this country and in yours, it wasn't a safe thing to be. You didn't talk about it in case you were charged with something against the law and sent to prison. I had friends who went to prison because they'd made love. I mean, it's dreadful to think about it now. But so to slip back into that world and imagine what it would have been like for me made it personal. So, although it's a strong melodramatic story, it's utterly believable, or I felt it was.
Speaking of characters, I know you've said that Gandalf from Lord of the Rings was your Casablanca. Can you talk more about what you meant by that?
Well, Casablanca's a lot of people's very favorite films that they like to watch regularly, or perhaps once a year, in some sort of ceremony almost. And I know Lord of the Rings is a classic, and kids come up to me who not even dreamt of when we made the film 25 years ago. And yet it's alive to them and part of their lives. And I feel very lucky to have been part of what's now a classic. And yes, it's Gandalf's very much alive for me.
Would you be open to returning to the role? I read that once you said you would be, but they better be quick.
Well, yes, before my knees give way or my brain. No, it'd be wonderful to go back to New Zealand, which is a part of the world I fell in love with, and all the very talented people working for Peter Jackson down there. And if it happens, I'm told it may, well, I'm ready and waiting, yes.
Can't beat a trip to New Zealand. Finally, I want to ask you, you're 85 years old, you're starring in this film, The Critic. You have another movie out later this year. You just wrapped up Player Kings, a stage play in London. You show no signs of slowing down. What is it that drives you and keeps you going right now?
Habit. The fact that I enjoy my work enormously. For me, it's a hobby and a passion. And without it, I don't quite know what I'd do with myself. Perhaps see a few more friends than I can always do at the moment. But no, I'll stop when I have to. But if I don't have to, I'm very happy to carry on if people will have me. Unfortunately, there are always old parts somewhere in a movie or a play that I could have a go at.
Is there still a dream role you'd love to tackle at this point?
No, there isn't. I've never had a bucket list of parts I wanted to play, but yeah, maybe a new work, a new play. Mind you, every film you make is a new one because, but plays you often are in revivals of old plays, Shakespeare and everybody else. But I think yes, one new play. That was an absolute sensation, then I could die happy. Yeah. I am happy, so I take what comes.
We can tell. Clearly, you still love working, and we love watching you. Ian McKellen, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. A new play for Ian. Let's put that into the universe. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now. Stick with us. The news continues right now. Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, the race against time on Florida's Gulf Coast as people there brace for Helene's impact. The storm now expected to make landfall later tonight, potentially as a Category 3 hurricane. Our Angie Lassman is tracking it all. A bombshell indictment targeting New York City Mayor Eric Adams. He's expected to face federal charges as soon as today, amid a wave of political controversies that have both plagued his administration and frustrated New Yorkers. We're digging into the multiple investigations and high-profile resignations of the last few months, as Mayor Adams remains defiant, insisting he has done nothing wrong. Also this morning, an alleged Secret Service scandal that's landing the agency in hot water again. Questions swirling over its handling of those 2 attempts on former President Trump's life. What we know about an alleged groping incident involving a staffer for Vice President Harris, and how the agency is reacting. Plus, yes, and you might know her as an SNL standout, but ahead of the show's 50th season, Ega Wodum is taking her top-tier comedic talents to the classroom, teaching kids the art of improv. We're going to begin this hour with Hurricane Helene. It is already causing major flooding in Mexico. Now it's setting its sights on the Florida Panhandle, where it's supposed to make landfall later today, possibly as a major Category 3 storm. Parts of the Sunshine State are already feeling the effects as the outer bands lash the western coast near Tampa. And this morning, it's not just the wind that has officials worried. Forecasters say this storm could bring a 20-foot storm surge to shore, flooding much of the region. Now, officers are patrolling neighborhoods, ordering people in low-lying areas to seek shelter on higher ground, all while FEMA is starting to roll in those white trucks ready to help when the coast is clear. Meteorologist Angie Lassman is here with us in studio, tracking Helene's path as it pushes through the Gulf Coast, through the Gulf of Mexico on its way to the Florida Panhandle. We also have Andrew Morgan. He is with Taylor County, Florida Emergency Management. But let's start with NBC News Now anchor Tom Yamas, who's just south of Tallahassee on the Florida Panhandle. He has the very latest.
Conditions just starting to get bad here where we are south of Tallahassee. They're going to get more intense over the next 10 to 12 hours. If the forecast sticks, if that track sticks, Hurricane Helene's going to come right through here, Appalachia Bay. It'll be the biggest hurricane to come through here since the 1840s. Now, whether it's a Category 3 or a Category 4, it's going to cause widespread damage, and they're also worried about that storm surge, 15 to 20 feet. To give you an idea, that's somewhere near the top of those trees, those palm trees you see right there, and the National Hurricane Center has described described that only one way: unsurvivable.
Bigger than 4 foot.
In Florida this morning, it's a race against time.
The eye of the storm is coming in this region.
Residents making final preparations, bracing for Hurricane Helene. The monster storm strengthening overnight, picking up steam in the warm Gulf waters as it races towards the coast. Helene already slamming popular vacation destinations in Mexico, like Cancun. The hurricane could potentially intensify to a Category 4 when it reaches Florida with sustained winds near 130 miles per hour. And Tallahassee, the state's capital, could get hit the hardest.
We are prepared. We are 100% prepared, and we will respond. Nonetheless, this is going to be a catastrophic storm, and it's going to have severe damage.
Some areas along Florida's west coast expecting the storm surge to potentially reach up to 20 feet.
A mandatory evacuation has been ordered. Please leave this area.
At sea, cruise ships in the Gulf being diverted to avoid the storm.
So it's storming a little bit.
Hillary Patterson and her family stuck aboard the Carnival Paradise with at least an extra day or two at sea. Patterson is worried about her home in Port St. Joe, right in Helene's path. The same home devastated in 2018 by Hurricane Michael.
You've got a lot of people that we've got a free fun day on the water. They are so excited. And then you've got people like us that really need to get home because our, homes are in the path of the hurricane.
Air travel not much better, with all flights grounded at Tampa International Airport today, while first responders are preparing for potential emergencies.
We could expect anything from swift water and flooded area rescues to structural collapse.
But they're also sending out this urgent message.
Emergency responders will not be able to help you until the threat passes. You will essentially be on your own.
So where we are right now is Panacea. It's right on the bay. This area has been evacuated, and we will not be here for most of the storm. We're going to go inland to Tallahassee. But the capital of Florida has not seen a hurricane like this really ever, at least not in modern history. They have two big universities in Tallahassee, Florida State and Florida A&M. This hurricane caught a lot of people by surprise, especially students who weren't able to evacuate. So now both those universities have shelters. Reporting from Panacea, Tom Yamas, back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you. Let's bring in Andrew Morgan. He's a public information officer with the Taylor County, Florida Division of Emergency Management. His county is right in the Big Bend. Good to have you with us. Just tell us, what are things like right now? What are your biggest worries?
Yeah, our biggest worries right now is just basically trying to get everybody out. We've been trying to heed the warnings and just get everybody to just heed it and just understand that we need everybody to evacuate Taylor County. We do have some people that are kind of straggling along. I know there's a lot of traffic, and it's really hard to just pick up all your stuff and go, or just leave and just leave all your stuff behind. However, we are obviously it's tough right now, and we don't want people to get their lives lost. We don't want nobody to be we prefer that they're just out of the area, and we just want everybody to heed the warnings and just please evacuate Taylor County.
If you
that's probably our biggest concern.
If you haven't evacuated yet, do you still have time?
We do. You have time this morning to get out until about 12 o'clock. After 12 o'clock or this afternoon, we are asking everybody to stay at that time into a safe area, as safe as you can after 12 o'clock, because at that time we're going to start seeing heavy flooding on the roads, on the highways and such. And if you were to just start traveling during that time, we don't know if those roads would be operable at all.
20 feet of storm surge. What would that mean for your county?
20 feet. You're talking catastrophic. You're talking about homes could be moved, cars are going to be moved. As they mentioned, it's going to be life-threatening conditions everywhere. The storm surge is going to be obviously crazy, damaging winds. It's going to be a lot of flooding. So, it's going to be probably the worst thing that if it's inevitable, it's going to impact. How bad, if it's going to be a category 3 or 4, depending on how bad it's going to be on with the storm surge and the flooding.
So if someone does need to evacuate but can't for whatever reason, we understand that you've partnered with the ride-sharing service Uber. Tell us more about that and how it works.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. We have a coupon or like a promotion code. Helene Relief is going to be the promotion code. We've sent it out on all our platforms. That's going to be a promotion code you could put on the Uber app when you're checking out, and you will have a free Uber to be exiting the county. So please, if you don't have a vehicle to drive, or you can't figure out what to do, the Uber app, use that promo code Helene Relief, and that'll get you a free Uber out of this county.
For those who don't leave, whether they can't or they choose not to leave, just what's your message to them right now?
My message would be, if you were my family member, I would be calling you and telling you, hey, it's time to go. You got to move. Your life is worth more than your property. We'll be back stronger next time. We'll build your house back. We'll get your property back. But please, we can't get your life back. Let's go. Let's get out of this area. Let's be safe. That's all. That'd be the main thing.
Important message there. Andrew Morgan, thank you so much. We'll continue to check in with you. We're thinking of your county as this hurricane approaches.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
All right. For more details, let's look at your morning news now. Weather meteorologist Angie Lastman is tracking the hurricane. Angie, what do we know?
All right, Joe, we've got an update as of 8 o'clock this morning. We've got a Category 2 Hurricane Helene right now. Winds are up to 100 miles per hour. This is what we expected, right? It's still moving northeast at a pretty good clip, 12 miles per hour. It's going to pick up some pace here over the next few hours, and it likely will intensify too. Now, we know how large this system is. We know it's going to be fast moving. We know that the impacts are expansive, and that's why we've got these tropical alerts up and down parts of the southeast, stretching across the entire state of Georgia into South Carolina. We've got folks, of course, across Florida included in this as well. And that hurricane warning stretches from the Gulf Coast up into portions of central Georgia. When it comes to the track, we're likely going to see this system intensifying even more as expected as it sits over those really warm Gulf waters. It's entering territory of sea surface temperatures well over 80 degrees. So it's got plenty of fuel. It's got kind of an environment that's going to be conducive to a major hurricane, intensifying into a major hurricane here in the short term. When we talk about the timing of the landfall, about 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. So after dark, across parts of the Big Bend, you can see kind of how tight this cone is. And we are looking at the Big Bend for that landfall as a Category 3. Notice Tallahassee. It's right in line with that. I mentioned that this is a fast-moving storm. So that means that even as it spends time interacting with the land, it's not going to weaken all that much before it makes its way to Tallahassee. So we'll still be dealing with a Category 3 system here as we look for impacts to Tallahassee. That could potentially mean we're talking really historical wind damage for that city specifically, but across that region. The tropical storm force winds, again, really expansive, nearly 500 miles wide. So that tells you how much it's going to impact what happens here moving forward and the things that people are going to have to deal with. As it moves to the north, it'll move again at a quick clip. It brings all that rain with it. It brings the strong winds as well. We'll see the Atlanta metro area dealing with those strong winds too, and then it kind of centers across parts of the Tennessee Valley, and we're going to see the potential for some difficult flooding across this region too. Let's kind of dissect those impacts though. The hurricane force winds, those are really closer to the center. So we've got Tallahassee anywhere from 90 to 120 miles per hour. That's why I mentioned that historic damage that's likely for the capital of Florida. We've still got the 80 to 100 mile per hour winds for Cedar Key. And as you move down towards Tampa Bay, nearing hurricane strength, but it looks like more tropical storm force winds. When we deal with those strong winds like that, of course, power outages are going to be likely. That could last for weeks in some of these spots. And we'll see the downed trees. We know the kind of canopy that places like the panhandle of Florida have, specifically Tallahassee. It's not going to be hard for those trees to come down, especially considering they've already been dealing with plenty of rain across this region ahead of the system even making landfall. On top of that, we've heard it. This has been one of the main takeaways. We know storm surge, the #1 killer in these systems, it's always water. Places like Tampa Bay, 4 to 8 feet. That's going to be potentially all-time surge records that we could reach in some of those spots. Nothing to laugh at, of course, but 10 to 20 feet is what we're expecting, a little closer to the center of it. The geography of this area is really something that is making this kind of worst-case scenario. We've got a really shallow shelf offshore, so that water essentially has nowhere to go. When we talk about tide times, it's going to be important. Notice the high tide time, 11:35 p.m. for Cedar Key. That means that we could be dealing with, the high tide just after the system makes landfall. Right now, we're talking about 1.5 of inundation from this system, and it hasn't even arrived yet. A similar story in Tampa Bay. We've got 2 feet right now in St. Pete, Clearwater Beach as well. So some flooding already occurring across this region. And then that's not even to mention all of it. We've still got to deal with the really heavy rainfall, Joe. The flash flooding is going to be a major event, specifically across the Appalachians. I don't want people to think that once it makes landfall, it's over, because we've still got up to 20 inches of rain that will be possible, high elevation areas, mudslides, landslides. This is going to be something we deal with well into Friday as well.
And this thing is so big. I mean, we're seeing tropical storm warnings in places that usually just don't get them, right?
Yeah, and it's moving so fast, so it's so big. It has far-reaching impacts. It's moving really fast, so it doesn't have time to weaken. So that means that places like Atlanta, and east of it, could see some tropical storm force winds. So people hopefully preparing, evacuating closer to the coast is going to be the best option if you're in those evacuation zones.
All right, Angie, we know you'll stay on it. Thank you so much. New this morning, sources tell NBC News that the FBI here in New York City is conducting a search of Gracie Mansion. That's the home of Democratic Mayor Eric Adams. The FBI declining to comment on this right now. The mayor has been indicted and is expected to face federal criminal charges that could be made public as soon as today, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter. Comes amid multiple separate probes involving the mayor's administration and campaign, which have already led to a series of high-profile resignations. Adams denies any wrongdoing. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett is following all these developments. Laura, good morning.
Hey, Joe, and those developments really changing by the minute here. As you mentioned, the search of Gracie Mansion, a major step in this investigation, meaning that they have probable cause to believe that a crime has been committed. And while we still don't know the charges, as they are still under seal this morning, this is obviously an investigation in the works for quite some time. The mayor campaigning as an agent of change, saying he was going to be the face of the Democratic Party. Obviously, a far different situation for him now, Joe.
I know I am innocent.
This morning, embattled New York City Mayor Eric Adams denying wrongdoing as he vows to fight for his job and against any criminal charges.
I will fight these injustices with every ounce of my strength and my spirit.
The Democrat expected to face federal charges in New York as soon as today, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter. The precise charges are unknown as the indictment remains sealed, but WNBC has reported a long-running federal corruption investigation has raised questions about whether Adams' mayoral campaign received illegal donations from the Turkish government. In a video statement overnight, Adams defiant.
Make no mistake, you elected me to lead this city. And lead it, I will.
The indictment marks a staggering turn for the former police captain turned politician. For months, his administration has been operating under a cloud of investigations, subpoenas, and scrutiny that led to multiple high-level resignations, including the city's police commissioner and school's chancellor, amid multiple federal probes. The FBI searched the Brooklyn home of Adams' top fundraiser last November, the first sign federal authorities were looking into connections between the Adams campaign and Turkey's government. At the time, multiple sources told WNBC that Turkish officials were seeking help in expediting the approval of a new diplomatic building, despite safety concerns. Days later, FBI agents stopped Adams, leaving an event in Manhattan, seizing his cell phones and iPad. Still, the mayor dug in, maintaining he did nothing wrong and had no knowledge of any improper fundraising, saying just this week,
I'm stepping up, not stepping down.
But some high-profile New York Democrats calling on Adams to resign, even before the indictment news broke.
And I think for the best of the city, it would be best for Mayor Adams to stay.
Now, Joe, the U.S. Attorney's Office and attorneys for Mayor Adams are still not commenting on all this. We are going to continue to monitor that situation down at Gracie Mansion, of course, as the morning unfolds, Joe.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's talk more about this with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Danny, good to have you with us. As at this moment, we don't know what the charges are, but we know we've been seeing these investigations swirling around the mayor and his administration for some time. How does an investigation like this typically proceed?
Well, in the federal context, what you're seeing here is a classic federal-style investigation. We know that there were raids. We know that the federal authorities seized devices and other materials from people, including the mayor. We know there are all these other investigations going on, but we don't necessarily know the details. But this is the way the federal government often investigates corruption, bribery, and extortion cases. It spends several months gathering information, and you know that if they're going after the mayor of New York City, then they are not going to indict unless they're absolutely certain, not just that they can get an indictment, can prove their case more than probable cause, but they believe they can prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt.
What are the possible implications when we're talking about charges that might be related to a political campaign?
So there are two categories of laws, federal laws, that might be involved here. You have federal election laws, which, among other things, prohibit any contributions by a foreign national to any election. It can be federal, it can be state, it can be local. So you might see that, but I think far more likely the government's going to go for what I consider to be more layups. Some of their corruption charges they can bring. For example, honest services wire fraud. They could bring charges of bribery. Some of the federal statutes do apply to local authorities, local officials. So you might see those because those criminalize any giving of a thing of value, really, in exchange for official acts. And I think that's probably more likely what you'll see here. You might see conspiracy. You could see RICO. Any of those are potentially possibilities.
Again, Mayor Adams says he's innocent. He plans to stay in office. We've been talking a lot about, how former President Trump can run for office or even potentially hold office, even though he is facing all these charges. He's been convicted on some of these counts. What's the situation for the mayor? If he's charged with something, he can stay in office. Can he run for office? What are the possibilities of having him removed?
So that's an issue of state law, and the governor actually has the power to remove the mayor. There's no indication that the governor is going to do so. Mayors are not like presidents. They have no immunity, certainly not from federal charges, while they're in office or after they're in office. I mean, the federal immunity that we've been dealing with over the last 6 months, especially with the Supreme Court opinion on it, really only deals with presidents, the federal head of the executive branch. A governor, a mayor, a senator, none of these folks are protected by any kind of immunity. So there is no issue with charging a sitting mayor, especially by the federal government.
All right, Danny Ceballos, thank you so much. Appreciate having you on this morning. The U.S. and its allies jointly called for an immediate 21-day ceasefire on Wednesday to allow for negotiations between Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. This comes amid fears that a larger war will break out in the Middle East as conflict between the two sides escalates. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel joins us from Beirut with the latest.
The U.S. and France are pushing for a ceasefire, but at this stage there is absolutely no progress. In fact, the Secretary General of the UN just warned that Lebanon is on the brink.
After a week of intense Israeli airstrikes and an Israeli threat of a ground invasion into Lebanon, this morning a diplomatic push is underway, with talk of a ceasefire that is as fragile as it is temporary. The leader of Israel's opposition posted on X this morning that Israel should accept today a 7-day ceasefire. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's office quickly shot that down, saying in part, the news about a ceasefire is incorrect. The Prime Minister instructed the IDF to continue fighting with full force. President Biden and France are pushing for a deal at the United Nations.
See, we put out a statement for a 21-day ceasefire along the Israeli-Lebanese border. It's important this war not widen.
Israel has dealt Hezbollah significant blows over the past several weeks, targeting the group's communication systems and its leaders. And yesterday, Israel's chief of staff said the military is preparing for a ground invasion to devastate Hezbollah inside Lebanon. Hezbollah fired dozens of rockets at Israel overnight, many landing in the sea. The United Nations says nearly 100,000 Lebanese have already fled areas under Israeli attack. Many are crowding into schools. 30-year-old Nervin, who declined to give her last name, told me she came to Beirut with 21 members of her family, including her 2 young children.
She's saying that she has a message for the American people that they should listen, they should see the children, and that they should speak to their government and act because they saw what happened in Gaza and they don't want the same thing to happen here.
But few in Lebanon have much confidence that diplomacy will work.
The problem with the ceasefire is that the two sides are speaking past each other, with Israel insisting that Hezbollah pull back from the Israeli border and Hezbollah demanding that Israel stop its war in Gaza. And neither side is showing any sign of compromise.
Richard, thank you. Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including a new scandal that's rocking the Secret Service this morning. What we know about an alleged groping incident involving an agent and a staffer for Vice President Harris. But first, in the race for the White House, a critical TV interview with the VP as she lays out her economic vision for America. Those stories and more up next. We're back now with a look at the race for the White House, which is now focusing heavily on the economy. Yesterday, Vice President Harris sat down for her first one-on-one national television interview as the Democratic presidential nominee, laying out her vision for where the U.S. economy goes from here. Well, former President Trump slammed her for not doing enough to make things better during her time in office. Joining us with the latest, NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. We have now learned that tomorrow Vice President Harris is going to return to the border, her first trip there in more than 3 years, an issue, of course, that remains a vulnerability for her. Another is the economy, though polls do show Harris is cutting into former President Trump's advantage on that issue. And on Wednesday, looking to put more meat on the bones of her proposals, we heard from Harris just as Trump blames her for inflation following the pandemic.
Vice President Harris in battleground Pennsylvania, drilling down on her vision for the economy in her first one-on-one national TV interview since becoming the Democratic nominee, speaking with MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle.
And I'm not mad at anybody for being rich, but they should pay their fair share.
On the campaign trail pushing her economic policy, Harris slammed former President Trump as a friend of billionaires, not hardworking Americans.
He's only interested in making life better for himself and people like himself, the wealthiest of Americans.
Polls show most likely voters still believe Trump is better equipped to handle the economy. Trump in North Carolina blasting Harris, saying prices remain way too high.
Kamala goes to work every day in the White House. Families are suffering now. So if she has a plan, she should stop grandstanding and do it. Just do it.
Responding to calls for more policy specifics, the Harris campaign released an 80-page economic blueprint Wednesday, including child tax credits and housing payments. Harris was asked how she would pay for those elements.
If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share.
Trump also targeting the Biden-Harris administration's foreign policy ahead of Harris and President Biden's scheduled visit with Ukraine's president today, criticizing Volodymyr Zelensky for his handling of the war.
Those cities are gone. They're gone. And we continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refuses to make a deal. Zelensky, you have a country that has been obliterated, not possible to be rebuilt.
And here at the White House today, Zelensky is expected to present his so-called victory plan for the war. A meeting between Trump and Ukraine's president is not going to be happening today. Asked by NBC News why, a source familiar with the matter pointed to Zelensky's last weekend interview in which he called Trump's running mate J.D. Vance too radical for his opposition to additional military aid to Ukraine. Joe?
All right, Peter, thank you so much. Now to the new controversy surrounding the Secret Service. The agency is now investigating one of the agents in Vice President Harris's security detail following allegations of a sexual assault incident with a member of her staff. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us from Washington with more on this. Ryan, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. This new scandal comes at a time where the agency is under intense scrutiny over its handling of two different assassination attempts on former President Donald Trump. It is leading to members of Congress calling for the service to clean house.
The United States Secret Service, once again at the center of controversy. Two sources telling NBC News that an agent has been put on leave after being accused of assaulting a staffer for Vice President Kamala Harris. The agent accused of groping the staffer without her consent after a night of drinking during an advanced planning trip in Wisconsin.
The vice president's office saying in a statement that they have, quote, zero tolerance for sexual misconduct. It comes when this service is already under intense scrutiny after 2 different assassination attempts of former President Trump. Marisa Randazzo, the former chief research psychologist for the Secret Service, says the agency is overtaxed during this election season.
It's like trying to fix a plane while you're still flying it.
In 2014, 3 agents were sent back to the United States after a night of drinking in Amsterdam ahead of a trip by former President Obama. And in 2012, the agency was rocked by an international sex scandal. 8 agents lost their jobs after they were accused of bringing prostitutes back to their hotel rooms in Colombia. Randazzo says these incidents impact thousands of diligent agents.
When I worked there and something like this happened, it was incredibly frustrating and demoralizing. But that never stopped the commitment that the agents and professional staff and support staff bring every single day.
Now, after those assassination attempts, the widespread problems leading lawmakers to call for an overhaul of the agency's leadership.
There has to be new blood coming from the outside that gives the hardworking, skilled Secret Service agents the leadership they need and deserve.
Meanwhile, the increased security posture by the Secret Service is forcing the campaigns to adjust their plans. The Trump team was informed by the agency that they could not provide the necessary manpower and assets to keep the former president safe at an outdoor rally this weekend. That event will now happen at an indoor venue. Joe.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. Let's bring in Carol Lenning for more on this. She is the national investigative reporter at the Washington Post. She also literally wrote the book on the Secret Service, Zero Fail, the rise and fall of the Secret Service. Carol, can't think of anyone better to talk with this morning. Thanks for joining us. So, I mean, the public image of the Secret Service, well established. Sunglasses, earpieces, suits. When we hear a story like this and everything else we've heard recently, though, it does make you wonder what's going on behind that image. So having done lots of reporting on the organization, tell us, what is the culture like there right now?
I think Ryan hit something so important about it. The culture is one of patriots. You know, these are people who work their tail off, and especially during a campaign, the sacrifices they make to protect the president and more than 40 other people. Remember, they have quite a few people to protect: grandchildren, stepchildren, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Homeland Security. They're dedicated like no other to this mission. But there is a culture of the Secret Service that I documented 10 years ago and that is still flaring now and not solved. It's a culture of denial and also an alpha male kind of bravado of, we've got this, boss. They deny that there are problems when things happen, and they also cover things up. That culture of cover up rather than reveal the problem is endemic to this agency. I wonder how that's going to change, other than a real injection of new blood, new leadership that says we have to change the way we do things. Of course, they're strapped, and stretched too thin. In Zero Fail, what I found is that during campaign seasons, it's really a duct tape operation of people sweating through their shirts to get this job done of protection, going from the United Nations General Assembly to the event in Butler with Trump, to an event with Jill Biden in Pittsburgh, to an event the next day with Joe Biden in Texas, and then off to the Republican National Convention. That's what the middle of July was like for the Secret Service, and you can see why they can't cover all their bases.
So, I mean, as we heard in Ryan's piece, these current controversies surrounding the Secret Service, they made lawmakers call for change. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee released a report yesterday about the multiple Secret Service failures ahead of former President Trump's July assassination attempt. You touched on this. Is there a sense that maybe the job of protecting the president in this day and age has gotten too big for this agency, that it does need to be remade from the ground up, as some have suggested?
There are two things that I've heard recommended over the last decade, and those recommendations are flaring again now in the wake of 2 assassination attempts against Donald Trump and other security breaches that are smaller. The first one is the Secret Service really has two missions that go back to its creation in the 1800s. One of them is investigating financial crimes. A lot of agencies investigate financial crimes, but the Secret Service clings to that part of its job to say that this helps them make agents better investigators. But it really does stretch them into these other realms that aren't central to protection. The other thing I've heard people say is they've got to increase their budget dramatically because somebody like Donald Trump is not just a former president. You know, the model for protecting Jimmy Carter can't be the model for protecting Donald Trump. He's a political candidate. He's high profile. Some people could say he has a higher threat matrix, a higher threat sort of profile than Joe Biden right now, maybe higher than Kamala Harris. And so the Secret Service has to change the way it decides how to protect individuals, not just based on their title or their job, but really the threat against them. The same thing happened with Michelle Obama, right? She was just a first lady. But while she was first lady, the threats against her and her popularity as well, the people, the crowds that would swarm around her when she stepped out of a limousine were like no other first lady, and they had to change their playbook to protect her.
All right, Carol Lenning, thank you so much for your expertise this morning. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Coming up, the rise and fall of one of the most controversial figures in professional wrestling, Vince McMahon. It's all chronicled in a shocking new Netflix docuseries that dives into the multiple accusations of sexual abuse by former staffers through the years. Now the media titan is speaking out. We're going to bring you that story next. We're back now with international headlines. India has confirmed its first case of a deadlier strain of Mpox. NBC's Danielle Hamamdjian joins us from London with that and some other international headlines. Danielle, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. That's right. A deadlier strain of the Mpox virus confirmed in the southern Indian state of Kerala. The patient is a 38-year-old man who recently traveled to Dubai. He's currently in hospital in isolation. Mpox, previously known as monkeypox, was declared a global health emergency last month after it spread outside the Democratic Republic of Congo. The strain has since been detected in Sweden and Thailand. Authorities have now identified 29 people who came into contact with the patient in India, and they are now in quarantine. Over to New York now, where world leaders are addressing the UN General Assembly this week. The president of the Dominican Republic, took his turn, warning that his administration would take drastic measures to protect his country if a UN-backed mission in neighboring Haiti fails. That mission includes hundreds of police officers from Kenya who are helping fight gangs controlling much of the capital of Port-au-Prince. What drastic measures could Dominican Republic take? The president didn't provide any details. And finally, in Thailand, same-sex marriage is now legal. A new law using gender-neutral words such as individual rather than men and women was approved overwhelmingly by legislators and will take effect at the end of January. And Joe, this means that Thailand is the first country in Southeast Asia to recognize same-sex marriage.
All right, Danielle, thank you so much. Appreciate it. A new docuseries from Netflix is putting the controversial career of WWE founder Vince McMahon back in the spotlight. The show dives into the creation of his multi-billion-dollar wrestling empire. It also covers the scandals surrounding his rise to power, including multiple accusations of sexual abuse by former employees, all of which he denies. Here's NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Malas.
Vince McMahon, the larger-than-life creator of World Wrestling Entertainment.
WrestleMania!
An over $8 billion business empire that spans massive live events and TV specials, creating household names of wrestlers like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, John Cena, and Hulk Hogan.
In the world of professional wrestling, Vince McMahon, he's easy to hate.
Now McMahon is the subject of a new Netflix documentary, Mr. McMahon, a 6-part series featuring interviews with WWE stars and McMahon himself.
No one really knows me.
Chris Smith of Tiger King fame sat down with the embattled wrestling titan 2 years ago for over 100 hours of interviews. The series chronicling his rise and fall, with McMahon directly addressing multiple allegations involving sexual abuse and drugs through his decades-long career. From being accused of rape in 1986 by a former WWE referee.
If I wanted a $500,000-a-year contract, I had to satisfy him.
Once you're accused of rape, you're a rapist. But it was consensual, and actually, had it been a rape, the statute of limitations had run out.
To charges in 1993 for allegedly distributing steroids, of which he was eventually acquitted.
It wasn't illegal to buy steroids from a physician. I bought some from him.
But it was a bombshell civil lawsuit this January from former employee Janelle Grant that ultimately led to McMahon fully resigning from what had become his life's legacy.
A lawsuit against him that contained some of the most graphic details imaginable.
Grant accusing him of sex trafficking, civil battery, and emotional distress.
She's been fearful since she's been sex trafficked.
Grant, who did not take part in the documentary, alleges that McMahon forced her into a relationship in exchange for a job at WWE, and that McMahon shared sexually explicit images and videos of her without consent, even recruiting others, including former WWE executive John Laurinaitis, to have sexual relations with her.
We think it's, and Janelle thinks she needs to tell her story in her own way and at the right time for her. She's not a WWE storyline. She wants to take ownership of her own story, and I think she deserves the dignity of that.
Laurinaitis and McMahon, both named in the lawsuit, have denied the accusations. At the time, McMahon released a statement calling the suit replete with lies, obscene made-up instances that never occurred, and a vindictive distortion of the truth. Laurinaitis calling the accusations misguided, and that he would be vigorously defending these charges in court, not the media.
All kind of crap like that people are digging up and trying to find something on you.
As for the documentary, McMahon has accused producers of using typical editing tricks to support a deceptive narrative and hopes viewers will remember that there are two sides to every story. Most recently, McMahon finding himself under federal investigation once again, this time by the Southern District of New York for sex trafficking, after it was revealed in an explosive 2022 Wall Street Journal report that McMahon allegedly paid millions of dollars to 4 women over more than a decade to secure NDAs after they accused him of sexual misconduct. Grant's attorney said their office is looking into other potential claims against McMahon.
We were inundated to the fact where my partner, Eric Holland, was concerned some of these women that were listening to these stories that work with us, and men, were beginning to feel traumatized themselves.
What other sorts of allegations are you hearing about?
There is a culture of victimization of women. We've heard from women and men that there wasn't really a safety net there, that it was Vince's show.
And our thanks to Chloe Malas for that report. Coming up, yes, and she is a breakout star on Saturday Night Live, returning for the show's 50th season this weekend. But that's not all Ego Odom has up her sleeve. After the break, why she's now taking her skills in improv to the classroom. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now. Students in Baltimore are getting a helpful hand in learning from a surprising source. Saturday Night Live star Ego Odom. She returns to SNL this weekend for her 7th season on the show and says that if she weren't acting, she'd probably be working for a nonprofit. Well, then last year she decided, hey, I can do both, creating a different kind of educational program in the place where she grew up. Ego's here! At City Springs Elementary and Middle School, learning is no joke. Even if the lesson is improv comedy. And the teacher is actress Ego Odom.
I thought it would be a great thing to bring back to Baltimore, where I'm from, to my home, and share with the young people here, because it's something I wish I had been aware of.
Who's gonna take it? Improv is when you perform without a script, something Ego didn't even try until after she moved to LA for college. Like all the comedy greats, you majored in biology.
Yes, that's a good one.
Improv then is what really got you into this, right?
I started taking an improv class. I wasn't happy about taking an improv class. I didn't want to. But once I got in there, I felt like this is actually really enjoyable.
Improv led to sketch comedy, which eventually led to Saturday Night Live.
That man ain't give me no ketchup.
This year, the comedy series Mr. Throwback.
These tablecloths are way too short. All the dads with their suits and dunks. I don't want to see feet.
But with time on her hands during last year's writer's strike, Ego wanted to get back to her comedy roots, which is why she reached out to her old high school teacher, Todd Wade. What was Ego like as a student?
She was that kid. That friggin' kid who just, like, lit up a room.
Working with the Baltimore Improv Group, they developed a program to teach improv to students and staff across 6 local schools. Ego visited to kick off the new curriculum, and I got to join in. If someone's scratching their head and being like, why are we teaching kids improv? We want them all to be comedians?
No, absolutely not. I had a friend who was an accountant who took an improv class. She wanted to do something that kind of got her out of her comfort zone and more comfortable standing before people without any prepared material and just communicating with and connecting with other people.
I took my first improv class last year, and I quickly figured out it wasn't necessarily about making people laugh. There are other skills to learn here, right?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. That's the thing. I think people are so intimidated by the notion of improv because they go, I have to be funny, but improv also has us fail, you know, and be comfortable failing and comfortable, you know, not quite excelling or making a mistake. There's some magic that can really happen in improv when someone makes a mistake.
One of the pillars of improv is the concept of yes and. That you're always adding to what someone else does, never tearing them down.
Your improv teammate might say, this wall is blue, and you're gonna say yes, and you're gonna add to that reality. And I think that's really just like life. You cannot control or predict what is going to happen to you today, in an hour, tomorrow, but you can say yes and.
The kids learn to listen and collaborate. What has been the reaction?
Ecstatic, like, improv is joy.
It's a joy factor because in the moment when you're doing improv, you have to be present. And oftentimes when you're dealing with kids, they can really be stuck in like a past situation.
The students told us it was also good for their anxiety.
Help you get a right space in your mind and help you stop stressing.
And sometimes I get mad on the football field, so I just think about what I learned in improv and use it on the field.
And that helps you?
Yes.
Which is why Ego wants more schools to say yes and. Ego hopes to expand the program first in the area around Baltimore, then to the country. She also says she'd love to bring it here to New York. After all, this is where she lives and where she'll spend the next year celebrating SNL's 50th season starting this weekend. You can also check out Ego in her series Mr. Throwback, which is streaming now on Peacock. Coming out, it turns out the world's latest it girl is a baby hippo. After the break, we're going to head to Thailand for an adorable behind-the-scenes look at how Moo Dang managed to capture the hearts and smiles of millions across the globe simply by being herself. Adorable. It's next. Stay with us. We are back with some big news from our NBC family. A little earlier, Hoda Kotb announced live on the Today Show that she is going to be stepping down as co-anchor early next year. She has been with the show for 16 years and with NBC News for 26. Hoda said she made the decision when she turned 60 years old recently. Here's some of her emotional message to viewers.
This is what the top of the wave feels like for me. And I thought it can't get better. And I decided that this is the right time for me to kind of move on. And then I thought about, obviously I had my kiddos late in life, and I was thinking that they deserve a bigger piece of my time pie that I have. I feel like we only have a finite amount of time.
You know, folks always ask me, is Hoda as nice as she seems? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. We are very excited for her new chapter. and excited to celebrate her over the coming months. All right, let's end this hour with the hottest new it girl, Moo Dang, the baby hippo. This morning, we're taking you inside the home of this adorable animal who has quickly become an internet sensation. NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer paid a visit to her zoo in Thailand and found out what it's like seeing those famous pink cheeks up close.
Anybody who's been anywhere near the internet lately knows that she needs no introduction. Not only is Moo Ding the glossiest attraction here at Khao Kiao Zoo, but the giant status of this tiny pygmy hippo has truly gone global. She's quickly become an internet sensation. These days, Moo Ding, the baby pygmy hippopotamus, seems to be everywhere.
She is so adorable.
Across social media and websites, the meme of the moment. And so we're in Thailand. She's this way. Seeking out this unlikely superstar in the flesh. All of it. The rolls, the cheeks. What do you like about her?
Because she's cute.
She's cute.
Most of the time I just see them on the internet. It makes me a little bit like, wow, it looks unreal that I get to see them with my own very eyes.
To see the curvy it girl, who at 2 months old has become the call sign for a world needing distraction and finding it cute, moist, and unbothered. Whether she walks, eats, plays around, anything Moo Ding does gets a reaction. Moo Ding fever started just after she was born, when the zoo uploaded the first images of her to Instagram. Safe to say, the world went wild for the sassy, slippery baby, whose name means bouncing pig or pork patty. Her keeper, Adapun Nundi, is the human behind her star power and can't keep up with demand for more. Moo Ding is not more tired by this. The one who's tired is here, he says. Do you think she realizes how popular she is? Moo Ding may not know, he says, but her mom may be surprised, as before it was quiet. Here at the zoo, attendance has swelled to over 10,000 visitors on some days. People can't get enough and they keep coming. Thais and tourists of all ages. It's a boom for the zoo. Can I get a t-shirt? Out of stock. And officials say for conservation efforts, too, with pygmy hippos considered an endangered species. Cameras offer a 24/7 live stream, but we watched Moo Ding do her thing for real as she lumbered, slept, found a cool corner, and slept some more.
It's so cute, very cute.
And we saw that between those viral antics making her famous, this is the one thing Moo Ding wants most: to be close to her mom, Jonah, never waddling away for more than a minute. Just a little girl, still new to the world, and unaware of how much it adores her. Moo Ding has become so next-level popular, she's now a registered trademark of the zoo, which means there will be a lot more merchandise, fan pages, memes, and bouncing around to come.
All right, Janice, thank you so much. That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stick with us. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.